The ballroom was bathed in a triumphant, golden light. 1,000 investors holding their breath. David stood at the podium. His smile was a flawless mask of corporate victory. This was his moment, the IPO launch of a lifetime. He raised the remote to reveal the core algorithm that would make him a billionaire. He pressed the button. The massive screen behind him flickered. It did not show the projected revenue. It showed a bank statement, then a text message, then a photograph. David's smile froze. The silence in the room became absolute. From the back row, I took a slow sip of my champagne. Cheers, my love. Your empire is officially liquidated. The morning sun filtered softly through the sheer linen curtains, casting a warm, golden glow across the polished oak floors of our meticulously designed home. It was a sanctuary I had built with my own 2 hands, a testament to a love I believed was invincible. I was Eleanor. Once, I was the youngest lead architect at a prestigious firm, a woman who commanded blueprints and steel with unyielding precision. But when David's startup began to falter, when the weight of his ambitious dreams began to crush his spirit, I made a choice. I stepped back. I traded my drafting table for domestic tranquility, quietly transferring my own trust fund into his failing company to keep it afloat. I told myself it was an investment in our shared future, a temporary pause in my career, to ensure his could finally take flight. For 5 years, the rhythm of our lives was a gentle, soothing waltz. I brewed his artisanal coffee every morning, ensuring the temperature was exactly 90 degrees. I hosted the tedious dinner parties, charming the ruthless venture capitalists, smoothing over David's arrogant edges with my practiced grace. I was the invisible foundation upon which his towering ego was constructed. He would come home late, smelling of expensive scotch and exhaustion, and I would hold him. He would whisper into my hair, telling me that I was his rock, that he could never have built this empire without my endless patience. I believed every single syllable. I wrapped myself in the comforting illusion of our perfect partnership, ignoring the subtle cracks forming in the foundation of my own identity. I gave him my youth. I gave him my capital. I gave him my absolute, unquestioning devotion. And in return, I asked only for his loyalty. It seemed like a remarkably fair exchange. The days bled into months, characterized by a quiet, domestic bliss that felt almost too perfect to be real. I spent my afternoons tending to the rare orchids in the greenhouse, cultivating beauty in the silent spaces of my life. I convinced myself that being the woman behind the great man was a noble calling, an architecture of a different kind. I designed a life of comfort, of stability, of unwavering support. Little did I know, the man I was protecting from the world was busy building a wrecking ball and aiming it directly at my heart. The illusion did not shatter all at once. It chipped. It started with a scent. Not cheap perfume. Something subtle, expensive, lingering on the collar of his bespoke Italian suit. Bergamot and crushed rose. I asked him about it. Just the new hand soap at the executive lounge, L. His voice was perfectly steady. His gaze, an ocean of calm sincerity. I nodded. I folded the shirt. I put the suspicion away. But the seed was planted. And suspicion is a weed that thrives in the dark. 3 weeks later, the bank statement arrived. An anomalie. A recurring charge for a luxury storage unit on the other side of the city. $2,000 a month. Under a holding company I didn't recognize. I asked him again. Server backups, darling. Confidential client data. You know how strict the new privacy laws are. He kissed my forehead. He poured me a glass of wine. He smiled. But the smile did not reach his eyes. It was practiced. It was cold. Then came the nights. The sudden, urgent business trips to Seattle. The phone turned face down on the marble counter. The subtle change in his password. The way he flinched when I reached across him for the salt at dinner. Small things. Tiny, insignificant details that a naive woman would overlook. But I am an architect. I notice when things are out of alignment. I notice when the geometry of a room changes. I notice when the math does not add up. My heartbeat began to change its rhythm. Faster. more erratic. I found myself standing in his study in the dead of night, listening to the hum of the air conditioner, staring at his locked desk drawer. The soothing waltz of our marriage had stopped. The silence was deafening. Something was buried here, something foul, and I was going to dig it up. I did not hire a private investigator. I did the math myself. Tuesday. He was supposed to be in a board meeting. I drove to the address of the storage unit. I waited. The rain started to fall. Heavy. Relentless. A black Mercedes pulled up. His car. My chest tightened. He stepped out. He was not holding server backups. He was holding a bouquet of white peonies. My favorite flowers. No, not for me. A woman stepped out of the passenger side. Young, blonde. Clara, his new executive assistant. The girl I had bought a designer handbag for last Christmas because I felt sorry that she was far from her family. He pulled her close. He kissed her. Deep. Hungry. Right there in the rain. My world stopped. Breath caught in my throat. Lungs burning. Hands shaking. Ice in my veins. The foundation cracked. The walls collapsed. The roof caved in. 5 years. 5 years of my life. Reduced to a cheap cliché in a rainy parking lot. I watched them walk into the building. His hand on the small of her back. The same way he used to touch me. I didn't cry. I couldn't. The pain was too absolute. It burned past sorrow and went straight into something primal. I drove home in silence. I walked into our pristine house. I looked at the life I had built. The expensive rugs. The curated art. The lies. All of it was a lie. I went to his study. I didn't care about the lock anymore. I took a heavy bronze paperweight. I smashed the drawer open. Wood splintered. Metal groaned. Inside, a second phone. A velvet box containing a diamond tennis bracelet. And a real estate contract. A penthouse in Clara's name. Paid for by the holding company. The holding company funded by MY Initial Investment. He wasn't just breaking my heart. He was stealing my future. He was using my sacrifice to build a palace for his mistress. I sat on the floor among the broken wood. The naive, loving wife died in that room. What stood up was something entirely different. Cold. Precise. Dangerous. I wiped my hands. The grief was gone. Now came the math. Revenge is not a burst of anger. It is a meticulously drafted blueprint. I did not confront him when he came home. I greeted him with a warm dinner. I smiled. I kissed his cheek. I tasted the ash of my own dead marriage on my tongue, but I swallowed it down. I had to play the perfect fool. For 3 months, I became a ghost in my own life. While he slept, dreaming of his IPO and his young lover, I worked. I contacted my old firm. I called in favors from corporate lawyers I had helped a decade ago. We reviewed the original documents of his company. The documents he had me sign when I gave him my trust fund. David was arrogant, but he was sloppy. He assumed I would never read the fine print of the intellectual property clause. He assumed the silent partner would always remain silent. He was wrong. The core algorithm, the one driving his billion-dollar valuation, legally, it rested on a patent filed under my maiden name, a technicality from the early days when his credit was ruined. I owned the foundation of his entire empire. I moved funds. Quietly, surgically, I funneled my initial capital out of his vulnerable accounts, masking the transfers through shell companies a dozen layers deep. I hired a forensic accountant to document every single dollar he had embezzled to buy Clara's penthouse. Every diamond. Every hotel room. I compiled the emails. I backed up the texts from the hidden phone. I built an ironclad, indestructible dossier of corporate fraud and personal betrayal. I did not rush. I let him build his tower as high as possible. I encouraged him to take on more debt to fund the extravagant IPO launch party. I hyped his ego. I watched him inflate with hubris. He thought he was invincible. He thought I was safely tucked away in the greenhouse, oblivious to the world. He did not realize that I had placed explosives at every structural weak point of his life. The wires were laid. The charges were set. All I needed was an audience. The night of the IPO launch. The grand ballroom at the plaza. Crystal chandeliers above, a sea of hungry investors below. David was in his element. He wore the suit I had picked out. He adjusted the tie I had bought him. He walked to the stage, bathing in the applause. He spoke of vision. He spoke of integrity. He spoke of the future. This company is built on absolute transparency. His voice echoed through the massive speakers. I stood at the back of the room. I looked at the tech guy in the control booth. A guy I had generously tipped $10,000 2 hours prior. I gave him a slow nod. The presentation clicked to the next slide. The core algorithm did not appear. Instead, a high-definition scan of the real estate deed for Clara's penthouse filled the 50-foot screen. The crowd murmured. David blinked. There seems to be a technical glitch. He laughed nervously. He clicked the remote again. A new slide. An audio file began to play over the surround sound system. David's voice, crisp and clear. Don't worry about Eleanor. She's clueless. I'll buy her out with pennies once the IPO hits. The company is ours. Clara. Pandemonium. Investors dropped their champagne glasses. Board members stood up, their faces pale with rage. David panicked. He frantically smashed the buttons on the remote. The screen flashed to the final slide. A legal injunction. A massive, glaring document proving that the core patent was being revoked by its rightful owner, Eleanor Vance. The company was suddenly worth nothing. Zero. I walked down the center aisle. The crowd parted for me. David looked down from the stage. His face was a mask of absolute terror. He was trembling. The wrecking ball had finally hit. I stopped at the edge of the stage. I looked up at him. My voice was calm, loud, unshakable. You built your castle on my land, David. I let the words echo. And today, I am collecting the rent. I turned my back on him. I walked out of the ballroom. The sound of his shouting, the angry roar of the investors, the frantic flashes of journalist cameras. It was a symphony of destruction. It was the most beautiful thing I had ever designed. You cannot build a future by crushing the person who laid your foundation, because eventually, the architect will return, and she will tear it all down.